we have talked a little about the offseason moves. Now let's talk about in-season moves, and we're just going to throw it out there, Joe. We're going to take a look at what the lineup might look like in 2016. You're the guy that not only pencils it in, you put it in pen if you want. But this is what we came up with. Again, Ellsbury and Gardner off the top. The right-hander A-Rod batting third. Tex, McCann, Beltran, and then down at the bottom, Starlin Castro in the 8th spot with Gregorius. Are we even close?
Well, I think that's probably pretty close to what it could be. When I look at that, you know, the one thing that you get concerned is as you get to the number 9 spot, you got 3 lefties in a row then, and that's something that we'll have to iron out. You know, I'm comfortable doing something like that because Ellsbury and Girardi proved that they can hit left-handers, and I thought Didi did a much better job, but you want to think about maybe splitting that up somehow. We'll have to see how it works out.
Joe, when we look at that lineup, I have to start right at the top with the 2 guys that you just mentioned, and Ellsbury and Gardner. Is there anything that you can do or that the staff can do to ensure that the second half fades that we saw out of those guys happened last year, that they don't happen again in 2016?
Believe me, that's one of the things that I thought long and hard about during this offseason, and that's why I think the importance of Hicks for him to have a good year is extremely important. Because if you can start playing Aaron Hicks 4 or 5 days a week and give these guys a day off a week, or maybe even 2 days if they need a couple days, it would really help them down the stretch.
So the big thing with Ellsbury and Gardner off the top, though, you're comfortable with is not necessarily people think break up the lefty-lefty, make it lefty-righty-lefty, etc. You're comfortable because they can hit both left-handers.
Yeah, I don't really have that much of a concern. I think they're going to give you good at-bats. But if we see something that we think fits better, it's something we'll definitely consider.
One of the themes of last spring training is what can the Yankees get out of Alex Rodriguez and Mark Teixeira? And then voila, 2015 happens, and you guys got a ton out of both of those players. How much confidence do you have that we'll see both of those guys a year later, a year older, give you similar production?
You know, I feel good about it. I think Alex has a much better idea what it takes physically and mentally to be a DH every day, and I think those little breaks that he gets playing the National League clubs actually really helps him. Tex, I saw him a couple weeks ago. I thought he looked great. You know, he had a freak injury last year, and he was on pace for, you know, an MVP type of season, 79 RBIs in 110 games or so. He was playing extremely well. So I expect him to be extremely productive. But I think it's important, too, that those guys get their days off. And I think Ackley becomes important in that situation, maybe at first base.
Alex Rodriguez played 151 games. I'm not sure he played a game at third beyond April. Yeah. Does he go into 2016 just as your DH?
Our DH.
No chance he gets.
That's what he's going to be. Unless we have a conversation in spring training that would, maybe I'd like to try to do this or that. I think he's strictly our DH.
With those 151 games, do you envision him, again, it's great to have his bat in the lineup, but giving him a little more of a break so he doesn't fade down the stretch in September? Yeah. Maybe knock it down to 140 games.
You know, I think our bench has a chance to be deeper and a little bit more experience with the Ackleys, with the Hicks. Catching, we're not sure where we're going to go there. Obviously, Gary Sanchez had a good year and had a huge fall league. But Austin Romine played really well last year, so you look at that. And then you talk about that other player that you're going to use. Is it a Refsnyder? And if it is, his versatility becomes really important for us as well. And we need these guys all to step up and contribute so our guys don't wear down.
Refsnyder is a guy who might be able to give you some time at third, but the guy who is supposed to play predominantly most of the time at third is Headley. He did not have the kind of season I think the Yankees anticipated last year. What do you think happened with him, and why are you confident that he can bounce back?
You know, I think he got in a little rut throwing, and he got in a little bit of funk, and it was tough for him at times, but it's something that he's working at. He worked at all year long. He'll work this spring training on. He's working on it right now, and we'll get him right.
All right, so a lot of fans are excited about the future, especially seeing a little glimpse of it with Greg Bird at first base down the stretch with Tex out. You've already mentioned Ackley playing some backup. Is Greg Bird part of the plan right now for that 25-man roster, or do you think he'll go get more season?
Well, the thing that you always have to measure is it more important for him to play every day or to play a couple days a week? And I think you also have to let spring training play out to see how things work out for us and before you make a decision. You know, there's been talk that he might go back to AAA. Let's let us get through spring training, because things a lot of times have a way of ironing out.
Joe, we've asked you about 10 questions about the lineup, and we haven't asked you a question yet about the guy who I think statistically was probably your best offensive player from May 1st on, Carlos Beltran. What about the way that after a rough April, he was able to resurrect his season and be as productive as he was?
You know, he really did, and he had huge hits for us down the stretch. You think about the home run he hit in Toronto and the production that he gave us. And I think, you know, for him, you know, I remember Lou Piniella talked to me about Raul Ibanez. Sometimes it takes older players a little bit more time to get going. So don't get too caught up with what you see in spring training. Don't get too caught up with what you see the first couple of weeks of the season. Guys start to come out of it, and I think that's what you saw from Carlos. And, you know, we'll give him his days off. I mean, he played as much as anyone down the stretch. He did not want a day off. And he would tell me, Joe, don't ask me. Don't even ask me, you know, because I would ask him, how you feeling? I'm playing. So, but, you know, with the Aaron Hicks, I think it really helped him. And the one thing that we tried to do, we tried to replace late in the games for defense to give him a couple innings because he was playing every day, and that does add up.
All right, let's move on to pitching, Joe, and talk about the starting rotation. And going into 2015, there were question marks about Sabathia's knee, Tanaka with the arm. Who is Nathan Eovaldi? When do you get Nova back? It feels like going in this year, there's still a lot of questions. They're just different questions. Yeah,
they are. You know, you look at Tanaka, he had the off-season surgery, you know, for the bone spur, and when he left in November 1st or so, he was doing very well. You know, Eovaldi had the arm problem last year. CC had the knee problem. You get a healthy Ivan Nova. You know, you look at Michael Pineda, it's as many innings he's thrown in a long time. You wonder how he bounces back. Severino threw extremely well. You know, we have 6 guys there for 5 spots. That's something that we have to iron out in spring training. And like I said, a lot of times it works its way out.
When you look at Severino, Joe, and what he was able to come up, never seemed flustered, very comfortable out there, able to perform at this high level. I know you don't want to put too much on the young man, but what can Severino be for you?
Well, I think he can be a starter every 5 days and be extremely successful. And I really believe he's going to get better as his slider and changeup get more consistent and as they improve. I mean, this is a young man that's not afraid to pitch inside. We saw that in spring training. I was like, wow. I mean, he's going inside to the toughest hitters and is very poised for a young age. And I look at the players that we brought up. I mean, they did a really, really good job. You look at him. You look at what Greg Bird. Look what Slade Heathcott did for us. You know, he hit the big 3-run homer in Tampa. A very poised young player that had a lot of confidence. Mason Williams did a very good job. Ref Snyder. All the guys in the bullpen. We're seeing a lot of fruits of the draft picks that we have made over the last 4 or 5 years, and they're playing an important role.
You mentioned Severino, and he handled the pressure really well last season, coming up the way he did. It's a different kind of pressure, though, this season, I think, maybe. Or is it not? Or how would he handle it?
I agree, because now you're expected to do well. Yeah. I always talk about that. Second season can be your toughest season because, A, you're not sneaking up on anyone. B, sometimes maybe you take for granted over the offseason, you know, what you did to get there, and how hungry you were to get there, and sometimes guys might let that slip a little bit, and obviously we've talked to our players about that. But now guys have had a chance to see you. So maybe you need to make some adjustments, and maybe you've never had to do that before because you've kind of breezed through the minor leagues. You went through the levels very quickly. You don't face a team 4 and 5 times a year. You just don't do that. So that's where sometimes your sophomore year can be a little bit tough. But I will say one thing about Sevy. Besides being very poised, he's a great student at the game. He's very bright, and he knows what he wants to do.
Joe, you've been around CC Sabathia a long time, a very proud pitcher, a guy with an accomplished career. The way the season ended for him last year, after going to alcohol rehab, you said you've spoken to him, and he's working out at Yankee Stadium. Let's talk about pressure for CC. You know he wants to succeed. You know he wants to excel. What do you feel CC can give you this year? Well,
I think that the knee brace really helped him last year. You look at the last month of his pitching with that knee brace. He wasn't wondering, is this going to hurt every time I land? Am I going to feel it? Am I going to have a shooting pain? Do I need to fall off on this pitch? And he pitched much, much better. So now that he's comfortable with the knee brace, that was the hardest thing, trying to get the big guy comfortable with it. Now that he's comfortable with it, I think he'll pitch better, and I think he'll have more consistency. All
right, let's move on to Masahiro Tanaka. And going into last season, you were asked this question about 10,000 times. Do you hold your breath every time Tanaka takes the ball? Well, he missed a month of the season. He came back after some wrist and elbow soreness, or forearm soreness, I should say, and he was fine the rest of the way. Do you still have the same questions going in, or do you feel differently about him this year?
No, I think you still have the same questions because of when he went through and he had the little bit of the off-season surgery on, even though it was totally something different. You still have questions because it's a physical grind and it's a change for pitchers that come from Japan because they're throwing every 6th or 7th day. A lot of times throwing more pitches in a game, but here the schedule's much different. I thought he had a pretty good sophomore season. People knew who he was, and I thought he pitched pretty well, and the numbers indicated that. But, you know, there's always that concern.
Joe, you caught so many pitchers in your career, and you know how just the grip on one pitch can be so meaningful. It seemed like when Eovaldi changed the grip on his cutter, all of a sudden he went from a pitcher who was going out there and being very respectable to a guy whose cutter was unbelievable, and then he became really consistent as well. He
became, you know, one of our better starters as the season moved on, and his split continued to improve.
Split, I said cutter. Thank you for...
And what he had was he had a strikeout pitch. I mean, that's the thing. And, you know, you think about a guy that throws 96, 97, 98, 99, and you say, well, why don't you just blow people away? Well, hitters see it all the time now. That's the difference. You know, maybe 15 years ago there were a couple guys that threw 95 plus. Everybody does now in bullpen. So the hitters are more used to it. So that split became very important, and he became a very good pitcher.
Well, I wondered that about him because if you're used to blowing guys away, there's a confidence that comes with that. And if you suddenly can't do it anymore, there's a lack of confidence. Some of that's mental. But once he learned that pitch, it's like a light switch went on, and he wasn't afraid to throw anything.
No, he wasn't. And the thing was, he had something down in the zone that was soft, and now something up in the zone that was really hard. And it gave hitters a very different look. And his slider did improve. I mean, there were days his slider was really, really good. And some days I thought, was that a split or was that a slider? You know, I mean, that's what it was. So he really took a step forward.
Speaking of sliders, Michael Pineda, and by the way, thank you for the save on the cutter versus the splitter. Michael Pineda has an unbelievable slider. He is a guy that there's so much talent there, and you guys have nurtured him along. What kind of expectations do you have for him?
You know, I expect him to have a better season than he did last year, and I think it was difficult because here again we were managing innings, and he was on a roll, and we had to, you know, we took a situation where we got like 3 off days in 10 days. Let's sit him here, skip him a start, so you know, physically he gets a rest and his innings don't get too high. And then he kind of got out of his rhythm, and that was tough. This year we don't have to manage his innings. You know, we can just turn him loose and let him do his thing, and I'm sure he's happy about that as well.
Joe, final thing. Let me ask you about the bullpen. Perfect world starters for 6th, then 7, 8, 9 with those 3 lights-out guys. But in the midst of all of that, you've got to have some reliable arms. Are there guys that we've already seen? Shreve, Pazos, maybe Jacob Lindgren comes back, gives you quality. Brandon Pinder, Brian Mitchell. Are these guys that can all help you right now in 2016?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think these kids got their feet wet, and I think they understand what it takes to be successful. I think Nick Rumbelow was in that picture as well. I thought he threw well. It was unfortunate he got a little bit of the flu bug at the end of the year, but he's got really good stuff. So I think there's plenty of options down there. I think the long reliever becomes important, and or you have to have 2 or 3 guys that can give you multiple innings. So if your starter gets knocked out early, you're not using those guys at the back end.